Today I'm sewing the Ella dress by Pattern Scout, an elegant sleeveless shift dress with clean lines and a timeless style. This pattern comes with two views, version A, a mini dress that hits above the knee, and version B, a chic midi length that stops mid-calf. The Ella can be cut on the bias for a fluid body-skimming drape, or cut on the straight grain for a structured wardrobe staple. It features a boat neckline, armhole facings, and a sleek invisible zipper at the center back. For this tutorial, I'll be making version A, the mini dress. I've chosen a gorgeous Lilac Blooms organic cotton from Fabricworm, a bright and colorful fabric that feels just right as we close out the summer sewing season. Let's get started. Here is the wrong side of my front dress piece and I've marked my darts. Now I'll pin them in place. Then I'll sew my darts from the outside edge to the point, leaving thread tails at the point so I can tie them in knots. Once the darts are sewn, press them down toward the bottom of the dress. Here is my front-facing piece and I've gone ahead and applied inner facing to the wrong side. Now I'm going to finish the raw edges along the inner bottom edge. Place the front-facing right sides together with the front dress piece along the neckline and pin in place. Sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Then we'll trim this neckline seam allowance to 1/4 inch. We're going to understitch the facing by turning the facing over its seam allowance and sewing the facing to its seam allowance all the way along the neckline with about 1/8 inch seam allowance. Here are my back dress pieces and I'm going to finish the inner center edges all the way from top to bottom, separately for both pieces. For the back facings, I've gone ahead and applied interfacing to the wrong sides, and I finished the bottom raw edges in the same way as we did for the front facing piece. And I'm going to place them right sides together with the neckline edges of the back dress piece, and pin in place. Then I'll sew the facing to the neckline edge of the back piece in the same way as I did for the front piece with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Then we can trim those seam allowances to 1/4 inch. And we'll understitch the facing in the same way as we did for the front facing, turning the facing up and over its seam allowance, then sewing the facing to its seam allowance underneath with about 1/8 inch seam allowance for both pieces. Once those front and back facings are understitched, you'll press them to the inside of the garment, giving that neckline a nice clean press. Then we're going to place the facings right sides together with the dress pieces once again along the armholes. And pin in place. Sew the facing to the armhole edges of the dress with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Then we'll trim those seams. And for both sides of the facing, we're going to understitch once again, turning that facing over its seam allowance and sewing the facing to the seam allowance underneath at about 1/8 inch seam allowance, starting from the armhole and approaching the shoulder seam. Your presser foot won't allow you to understitch all the way to the top of the shoulder seam, but go as far as you can. Repeat for both armholes. Then we can turn the facings right side out and give the armholes a good press. Repeat all of those steps to complete the armholes for both back bodice pieces. Sewing at 5/8, trimming to 1/4 inch, understitching, turning right side out and giving it a good press. Now that the neckline and the armholes of the front and back dress pieces are completed, we're going to turn the facing of the front dress piece wrong side out once again. And with the facing of the back dress piece still right side out, we're going to place it in between the front dress piece and its facing, so that the front and back facings are right sides together, and the front and back dress pieces are also right sides together. Align the raw edges of the shoulder seams and pin in place. Repeat to insert both back dress pieces into the shoulder seam of the front dress piece. Sew both shoulder seams with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Then I'll trim my seam allowances and turn these pieces right side out. And now we have a nice clean finish at the shoulder seams, and you can give them a good press. For the side seams of the dress, we're going to be sewing French seams. We're going to place the front and back dress pieces wrong sides together. And we're going to open out the facings away from the dress pieces, so that the facings for the front and back are also wrong sides together. Pin the side seam in place. Sew the side seam from the outer finished edge of the facing across the underarm seam and down to the bottom of the dress with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now that seam is sewn, I'm going to flip these materials so that they're now facing right sides together. And give this seam a nice crisp press. Then we'll sew this seam starting again from the top finished edge of the facing across the main armhole seam and to the bottom of the dress, this time with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once that's sewn, turn the facing back to the inside of the dress. Turn the dress right side out and press the side seam toward the back dress piece. Repeat all of these steps to create your French seam on the opposite side as well. For both center back edges, I've gone ahead and pressed those finished edges to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch, including the seam allowance of the facing pieces. With my invisible zipper opened up and the coils pressed open, I'm going to place one side of the zipper tape right sides together with its corresponding center back edge, opening out that seam allowance that I just pressed. I'm going to pin the zipper tape in place so that the top zipper stop is at the top seam. And I want the teeth of the zipper to be at the seam line that I just pressed a crease into. Pin from top to bottom of the zipper. Then we'll sew the zipper tape in place from the top to as far as we can get to the bottom of the zipper, sewing close to the zipper teeth. Now that one side of the zipper is sewn in place, I'm going to close the zipper so I can align the zipper placements on the opposite side of the center back, making sure the top zipper stop is at the seam on this side as well, and that the zipper ends in the same place across from the opposite center back. Then sew this zipper tape in place from top to bottom in the same way as you did on the other side. Now along the remainder of the center back seam, I'm going to place the fabric's right sides together and pin from the bottom of the zipper stitches to the bottom of the dress. Sew from the end of your zipper stitches to the bottom of the dress with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and press the seam open. We're going to finish the top edges of the center back on both sides in the same way, turning back the facing over the seam so that the materials are right sides together, and making sure that the zipper tape that extends beyond the seam is turned out of the way. Pin along the seam from the top to the bottom finished edge of the facing. Sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Trim the top corner and turn the top of the dress right side out. Repeat for both sides of the dress. For the bottom hem of the dress, if you've cut your dress on the bias, you'll want to let the dress hang for at least 24 hours. Then we can form a narrow hem along the bottom, pressing that raw edge to the wrong side by 1/2 of an inch, then pressing the raw edge once more by 1/4 of an inch. This will encase the raw edge in a rolled hem. Sew close to the upper inner fold all the way around. For the finishing touches, I'm going to start by adding a label at the center back on one side of the facing, just sewing it to the facing on either side of the zipper. Then lastly, on the inside of the garment, I'm going to sew the bottom finished edge of the facing to the side seam allowance, making sure to sew through the seam allowance only, not allowing the needle to exit the outside of the garment. Repeating on both sides of the dress. And now the dress is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming sewing tutorials, and I'll see you in the next video.